In today's episode, we will be discussing participle clauses. But for you to be able to understand what a participle clause is, you need to be able to understand first what a participle is. Most of you might be familiar with the concept of the past participle. Most of you might have heard this term before. The past participle of any verb is the form number 3 or the third form of any verb. What does this mean? Well, in English, any verb has 3 basic forms. Form number 1 is called the bare infinitive. Some other people call it the base form. Form number 2 is the past simple or the past tense. And form number 3 is the past participle. It depends on the type of your verb, and this determines the shape or the form of the past participle of the verb. For example, if your verb is regular, your past participle, which is form number 3 of the verb, will be ending in ed. For example, the past participle of work is worked. The past participle of stay is stayed. The past participle of close is closed. And the past participle of open is opened. All of these verbs are regular because they end in ed in form number 2, which is the past simple form, and in form number 3, which is the past participle. But if your verb is irregular, and all irregular verbs are compiled in a very famous table, which is known as Table of Irregular Verbs or List of Irregular Verbs. If your verb is irregular, your past participle, which is the third form of the verb, will not be ending in ed. For example, the past participle of begin is begun. The past participle of buy is bought. The past participle of cut is also cut. You need to learn this table or this list by rote. You have to memorize it or study it by heart, because you will need to know the past simple forms, which is forms number 2, and the past participles, and that's form number 3, of all these verbs, because you will need them more often than not. Right, so this is the past participle. Have you ever heard of the present participle? Oh, you might be familiar with the past participle, but you might be wondering if there is anything called the present participle, and as a matter of fact, there is. And it's quite simple. The present participle of any verb is the ing form of that verb. So the present participle of read is reading. The present participle of put is putting. The present participle of open is opening, and so forth. So this means that we have 2 participles in English: the past participle and the present participle. And any verb in English has got these 2 forms: the past participle and the present participle, and these are called the participles of the verb. Excellent. Our lesson today is about participle clauses. Why do we call them participle clauses? That's because they start with a participle. They might start with a past participle or a present participle. So if you have a group of words beginning, be careful, I'm saying beginning with a past participle or with a present participle, This group of words is called a participle clause. Excellent. Let me give you a few examples. Opening her eyes, comma, the baby began to cry. Opening her eyes, that's a participle clause because it's beginning with the present participle opening. And this participle clause means when she opened her eyes, the baby began to cry. And the participle clause in this sentence is opening her eyes. It's followed by a comma, as you could see, as I said when I was mentioning the example for the first time. So this is a present participle clause because it's beginning with opening, which is a present participle. Let me give you another example. Faced with a bill for $10,000, comma, Jean decided to take an extra job. Faced, you see, this is the past participle of face, and the clause begins with it. So this is a past participle clause. It says faced with a bill for $10,000, which means because Jean was faced with a bill for $10,000, comma, he decided to take an extra job. Excellent. So, as you could see, whenever you have a participle clause in your sentence, most probably you will have another clause with it in the sentence. The other clause, we call it the main clause. And the subject, which is an implied subject because it's not directly mentioned, the subject or the implied subject of the participle clause could be the same subject of the main clause or could be different from the subject of the main clause. Let me give you a couple of examples to demonstrate this. Arriving at the party, comma, we saw Ruth standing alone. Again, arriving at the party, comma, we saw Ruth standing alone. Who arrived at the party? We. Who saw Ruth standing? We. So the two clauses here, the main clause and the participle clause, have the same subject, which is in this example, is we. But look at the other example. Having wanted to drive a train all his life, that was an opportunity not to be missed. Let me repeat the sentence because it's a little bit tricky. Having wanted to drive a train all his life, comma, that was an opportunity not to be missed. So the subject of the main clause is that, the pronoun that. But the subject, which is implied for the participle clause, is a male, a man, having wanted to drive a train all his life. So this means that the two clauses in this sentence have different subjects. So the point I'm trying to make here is that whenever you have a participle clause in your sentence, usually it is accompanied by a main clause. The subjects of the two clauses may be the same or may be different. But honestly speaking, it is more careful and it's more grammatically correct for the participle clause and the main clause to have the same subject. Using different subjects for the participle clause and the main clause is more common in spoken, casual, colloquial English, not written, grammatically accurate English. Okay. Another point relating to participle clauses, and this point is more relevant to formal English, is that in formal English, a participle clause may have a subject. All the examples we have mentioned so far exhibited participle clauses with an implied subject. They didn't contain a directly mentioned subject. But sometimes in formal English, you might find that your participle clause has a directly mentioned subject. Let me give you a couple of examples. The collection of vases is priceless, comma, some being over 2,000 years old. So, the participle clause in this sentence is the second clause, and it's a present participle clause saying being over 2,000 years old. What is the subject for the participle clause? It's some. It's the pronoun some. So the collection of vases is priceless, comma, some being over 2,000 years old. This is a formally structured sentence because the participle clause includes a subject. Another example. Her voice breaking with emotion, comma, Jane spoke about her father's illness. So the participle clause in this sentence is breaking with emotion. It's beginning with a present participle, as you can see. What is the subject of that clause? Her voice. Her voice breaking with emotion, comma, Jane spoke about her father's illness. So as you could see, in formal English, you can have a subject in the participle clause, although this is not the more common way of showing or of having a participle clause in our sentences. The next point is negating participle clauses, changing them into the negative form. Well, most commonly, in order to negate a participle clause, you put the word not before the participle. Example, not bothering to put on his coat, comma, he left the house. The participle clause here is bothering to put on his coat. We put not before the present participle, bothering, and the sentence says, not bothering to put on his coat, comma. When you begin your sentence with a participle clause, you must put a comma after it to separate it from the main clause. And then the main clause says, he left the house. Sometimes, however, it will be clearer or more logical for the meaning to put not after the participle. For example, determined not to be beaten, comma, she put all her energy into the serve. Apparently, we're talking here about a volleyball player or a tennis player. So, the participle clause is determined not to be beaten. And it's followed by a comma because the sentence begins with it. Determined is the past participle, and we put the negative word or the negation word not after it. So, not here is placed after the past participle. Determined not to be beaten, she put all her energy into the serve. If you put not before the past participle, the meaning will change. It will become not determined to be beaten. It's actually the opposite now, which means that she wasn't careful about winning or not. But the fact of the matter is that she was determined to win. So, we put not after the past participle, and the sentence says, determined not to be beaten, she put all her energy into the serve. Sometimes it makes no difference, and the meaning will not be affected with the position of not, which means you can place it before the participle or after it. Let me give you an example. Not wishing to boast, she said nothing about her success. So, the participle clause here is wishing to boast. It begins with the present participle, wishing, and we are putting not before it. Not wishing to boast, comma, she said nothing about her success. But we can put not after the participle, and we can say, wishing not to boast, she said nothing about her success. As you can see, we have no change in meaning when we put the position of not after the participle or before the participle. Another point which I think is worth mentioning and explaining is using prepositions in participle clauses. Well, you can use prepositions in participle clauses. For example, before being changed last year, comma, the speed limit was 70 miles per hour. The participle clause here is being changed last year, and we are using the preposition before in it. And the sentence says, again, before being changed last year, the speed limit was 70 miles per hour. Sometimes you can use the preposition on in a participle clause, and in this case, on means when. Let's take an example. On returning from Beijing, comma, he wrote to the Chinese embassy. On is followed by the participle clause returning from Beijing, the famous Chinese city, comma, he wrote to the Chinese embassy. This means when he returned from Beijing, he wrote to the Chinese embassy. So on here means when. Also, using the preposition in can be with the meaning of because of, or due to, or owing to. Example. In choosing Marco, comma, the People's Party has moved to the left. That's political. Choosing, that's the present participle, and the participle clause here is choosing Marco. We have the preposition in used in it. In choosing Marco, which means because of choosing Marco, comma, the People's Party has moved to the left. Apparently, Marco is a politician with leftist directions or with leftist inclinations, right? Also, sometimes you can replace the preposition in a participle clause with the preposition by. For example, you can say, in working hard, or by working hard, comma, she passed her exams. Sometimes also you can use the preposition with, but you follow it with a subject and then you place the participle clause in order to give the reason for the action in the main clause. How's that? Let's take an example. With Louise living in Spain, comma, we don't see her very often. You see, the preposition here is with, the subject is Louise, and then the participle clause living in Spain. With Louise living in Spain, we don't see her very often. Why don't we see her very often? What's the reason for that? It's the fact that she now is living in Spain, or she lives in Spain now. So with Louise living in Spain, comma, we do not see her very often. So as you could see, we can use many prepositions in participle clauses. You can even use a preposition like without. For example, without seeing the photo, comma, I can't judge how good it is. Seeing the photo is the participle clause beginning with the present participle seeing, and we are using the preposition without in it. So without seeing the photo, I can't judge how good it is. Okay. I think with this, we can claim that we have covered most of the aspects of this lesson about participle clauses. Participle clauses come in handy in English writing and in English speaking. They spice up your command of English and they make your English sound more native-like. So I hope this was a helpful lesson and an instrumental for you in your English studies. And as usual, I ask you and I call on you to interact with the video, subscribe to the channel to grow our community, and leave down in the comment box any comments you might be interested in leaving. I'll be more than glad to respond to them. And if my content appeals to you, please feel free to share it to your friends and beloved ones, your family members, your friends, and so on, and anyone who might be interested in learning English. Thank you very much for your attentive listening, and I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson. Enjoy the rest of your day, my friends, and goodbye for now.